Michaëlle and her eminent husband, who's here today as well, the filmmaker Jean-Daniel Lafont, over lunch this past spring. Now, she's met some of the most important people in the world. I wasn't even among the most important people in the restaurant. But yet she was deeply and genuinely interested in me. We discussed our respective histories, my own family's escaping the Nazi Holocaust and then Latin American military dictatorships. But I learned this history from my parents. Michaëlle experienced this history personally, having come to Canada as a refugee from Haiti, fleeing the Duvalier regime at age 11. And our conversation was both, as is characteristic of the way she communicates, both intellectual and emotional. You know, we pivoted from English to Spanish to French and back. She could also, not me, but she could have conducted it in Italian or Haitian Creole as well, right? And she reads Portuguese. Her empathy and ability to listen exemplify communication at its best. It's an art, it's a science, and it's rooted in relationships. And like all the greatest communicators, as we discussed yesterday, and as Arthur Page told us a long time ago, she backs up her words with action and substance. Long before Michaëlle Jean was famous, she worked at a women's shelter, and then again, showing her early leadership skills, helped develop it into a network of shelters, one of the first right across the country. As Governor General, she used her office to push the envelope, to lead, to promote freedom and human rights, and to shine a light on a lot of spaces and places that Canadians hadn't wanted to look at before. After leaving office, Michaëlle Jean did not step down, she stepped up. She became Secretary General of La Francophonie, the global alliance of French-speaking nations. And after returning to Canada, she and Jean-Daniel Lafont created the Michaëlle Jean Foundation. They catalyzed social change through platforms for young people to amplify their voices and take action, exemplified by the National Black Canadian Summit and the Halifax Declaration, which perhaps she will address in her remarks. So every Governor General of Canada gets a coat of arms. And Michaëlle Jean's coat of arms bears a simple motto, Briser les solitudes, breaking down solitudes. It's a coat of arms, but it's not a call to arms. It's a call to action, one with communication at its heart. It's my pleasure to welcome the Right Honourable, Très Honourable Michaëlle Jean.
I have written a poem for a woman who rides a bus in New York City. She's a maid. She has 2 shopping bags. When the bus stops abruptly, she laughs. If the bus stops slowly, she laughs. If the bus picks up someone, she laughs. If the bus misses someone, she So I watched her for about 9 months. I thought, Now, if you don't know black features, you may think she's laughing. But she wasn't laughing. She was simply extending her lips and making a sound. I said, oh, I see. That's that survival apparatus. Now, let me write about that to honor this woman who helps us to survive. By her very survival, Miss Rosie, through your destruction I stand up. So I used the poem with Mr. Paul Laurence Dunbar's poem, Masks, and my own poem for old black men. Mr. Dunbar wrote Masks in 1892. We wear the mask that grins and lies. It shades our cheeks and hides our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile. With torn and bleeding hearts, we smile and mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should the world be overwise in counting all our tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. We smile, but oh my God, our tears to thee from tortured souls arise. And we sing, hey, baby, we sing, hey, oh, the clay is vile beneath our feet and long the mile. But let the world think otherwise. We wear the mask. When I think about myself, I almost laugh myself to death. My life has been one great big joke, a dance that's walked, a song was spoke. I laugh so hard, I almost choke when I think about myself. 70 years in these folks' world. The child I work for calls me girl. I say, yes, ma'am, for working's sake. I'm too proud to bend and too poor to break. So I laugh until my stomach ache when I think about myself. My folks can make me split my side. I laugh so hard, I nearly died. The tales they tell sound just like lying. They grow the fruit but eat the rind. I laugh until I start to cry when I think about myself and my folks and the little children. My fathers sit on benches. Their flesh count every plank. The slats leave dents of darkness deep in their withered flank, and they nod like broken candles, all waxed and burnt profound. They say, but sugar, it was our submission that made your world go round. There in those pleated faces I see the auction block, the chains and slavery's coffles, the whip and lash and stock. My father speak in voices that shred my fact and sound. They say, but sugar, it was our submission, and that made your world go round. They laughed to shield their crying. They shuffled through their dreams. They stepped and fetched a country and wrote the blues in screams. I understand their meaning. It could and did derive from living on the ledge of death. They kept my race alive by wearing the mask.
Yeah, chers amis, dear friends, we begin our conversation this morning with these poignant words from the poet Maya Angelou. Of such indignation, I have intimate knowledge. The pain, the recurrent feeling of hurt and outrage that insidious racism never ceases to inflict. But with you, I muster the courage. It takes courage to speak about it. And I'm willing to drop the mask. And with it, I hope you will understand and learn something from the essence, the raison d'etre of my commitment and advocacy. We come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. Breaking down solitudes. On September 27, 2005, when I was sworn in as 27th Governor General and Commander-in-Chief of Canada, Canadians heard me make this the focus of my vision for the country. The time has come to act with pressing urgency to break down solitudes. I'm a Francophone, Québécoise, so everyone immediately heard a reference to the two solitudes, widely used here to describe the much decried gulf between French and English in our country. But the woman of great determination who stands tall and whose voice resounds without tremor for the first time within the precincts of the Canadian Parliament is a Black woman, one who arrived in Canada as a child from Haiti in 1968 with her asylum-seeking parents. And my intention is crystal clear. I want to show Canadians that there are a great many more solitudes to address, multitudes still excluded through persistent marginalization and discrimination. And I want people to understand the need to dismantle barriers. We need an experiment with truth. To dismantle solitude is to tear down the boundaries, the limitations to humanity that are imposed on us, and those that we impose on ourselves. Those solitudes constrained behind walls are they not the very antithesis of advancement, of enrichment, value creation, growth, prosperity, and the pursuit of happiness? And as we break down those walls, we can uncover, we can appreciate and value the untapped collective wealth that resides in the abundance of human diversity, with the unique gifts and characteristics we were meant to share. Exclusion can only create a deficit of inclusive participation, a deficit of ideas, creativity, and perspectives, a deficit of possibilities, opportunities, a deficit of energies, synergies, and ultimately, a deficit of democracy, of growth, of economic responsible, viable, and sustainable human development. So, with dire consequences, exclusion is also an aggravating factor in mental health problems. And this must be said, we know, we see it every day, how exclusion kills and destroys lives. So I know what solitude feels like. Imagine this 10-year-old girl, a little refugee from Haiti. She's feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, nauseous, and dizzy, as she is blinded by the neon lights at Montreal's Dorval Airport. She's moving through glass doors with her mother and little sister. And leaving your home and native land forever is a bit like being torn apart, being separated from your own body. And to this day, the experience haunts me. Finally, Canada. For the first time, I experience what Canada feels and looks like. There I was, a child of the sun, arriving in the wintry land on a cold February night of 1968. A traumatized child who bore the marks of terror, brutality of all kinds, public executions, massacres, disappearances of entire families, my father arrested, never to be seen again, until they threw him out of a military truck right on our doorstep. He was unrecognizable, his face swollen, his clothes covered in blood, his own and that of his cellmate who died in his arms, his dead shattered by the blows. And as a 10-year-old, words such as dictatorship, repression, predation, corruption, the sum total of all this violence were already familiar to me. These were words on every trembling lip. And we had to flee, a matter of life and death. But where? You might try Canada, where asylum seekers may find a land of opportunity, we were told. As French speakers, perhaps you should go to Quebec, one of its provinces. And I remember physically fearing that slippery, icy ground. Then the wonder of that first snowfall forever etched in my memory. In the small asbestos mining community of Thetford Mines, Quebec, we were the only Black family. We couldn't escape attention. We were the main attraction, the object of benevolent curiosity most of the time, but not always. Here and there, a few racist slurs, a few insults. We watched. My father ran a well-known school in Port-au-Prince, the Haitian capital. He was recruited as a teacher at one of the first public high schools in the province, as Quebec was in the process of secularizing its education system in the hands of the church until then. My mother, who had initiated the first roving literacy initiative across Haiti, was less fortunate. Her experience was not recognized, and the prejudice assumed that an immigrant woman from a developing country could only be at home. And for my feminist mother, who had always been independent, this was a crushing defeat. Confinement within four walls was not for her. As for me, I was overtaken by the trauma of being uprooted. I walled myself up in silence. I could listen, but remained mute. Tears would well up in my eyes. Then at night, the sobs would soak up my pillow before recurring nightmares would take me back to the horror. It was a teacher who saved me. One day she gently called me and had me stand in front of the whole class. In a very soft voice, she said to me, "Michaëlle, tell us your story." I was frightened to death. "Please, Michaëlle, tell us your story." And I could only stare at her. Still, she insisted ever so gently. It felt like an eternity. Michaëlle, tell us where you're from. Please tell us." I was terrified. I smiled and kept smiling. The mask. I choked up. I felt like a turning point, and I finally managed to articulate a few words. That was when I saw a gleam of interest in the eyes of my classmates. There and then, words and memories began to flow. My voice came back to me. I spoke of love for my native land. I spoke of my fear. I spoke of my losses. I was in mourning. This was the day I began to heal. As the need to speak, to share, to tell started to grow, little by little, the nightmares started receding. So being heard felt like balm on my wounds. I learned how to breathe again. The invitation to share saved my sanity. Ultimately, communication saved my life. My family and I were and remain tremendously grateful to have found asylum in Canada. My parents taught me empathy from a very early age in Haiti. Michaëlle, indifference is not an option. You have to see everything, even if it's difficult, even if it's painful. and it made me the person I am today. In the high-level meetings at the United Nations on migration issues that I attended on several occasions as Secretary General of the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie, I was the only one in the room who could say, I've been there. For me, these are not rows of numbers, statistics. We are talking about shattered lives here. Women, men, and children making every attempt to be reborn and to rebuild. You know, my story is only one of many. We live in dangerous times. We live in critical times. The only thing that everyone seems to agree upon, and please raise your hand if you agree, is that this is an age of great polarization. We agree that it is. Do you agree the tone of political debate has worsened over the last several years? It has. Do you agree greater divisions, widening ideological chasm between competing groups? Yes. And how many of you see reduced capacity for compromise, heightened animosity? I thought so. It's an opinion that is shared by an overwhelming majority of American adults, 84% as of today. Now, that is quite worrisome. As groups tend to drift farther apart over time, it becomes increasingly difficult to achieve consensus on issues of public concern. And as chief communications officers, how many of you would agree that this creates specific problems for you as well? I thought so too. In a divided political and social landscape, almost any stance or message can alienate a portion of stakeholders, including customers, employees, and investors. Yet, choices have to be made. And making choices involves taking responsibility and attendant risks. Would it have been nice if all we had to do was find the middle road and ride merrily through the melee of better yet, fly above the fray and reach for the sky? I, for one, always strive to find common ground. It is a precious gift in diplomacy. It establishes terrain from which to build a good rapport. Another precious tool is the ability to elevate the debate. And this is what you are doing. Pull the conversation upward rather than drag it down. This certainly means resisting name-calling and personal attacks. It may mean at times taking some affronts in stride, letting a thing or two slip by, try not to take the bait, avoid taking things personally. Then attempt to raise the discussion to the level of shared fundamental values. This is, I find, rarely, rarely fails to improve the tone. Yes, it certainly helps this, and the most valuable skill of all, the capacity to listen, to really listen, wholly, intently, compassionately. Behind the violence of those who lash out often lies great untold suffering. I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hate so stubbornly is because they sense once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with pain, wrote poet James Baldwin in Notes of a Native Son, published in 1955. The year the Montgomery bus boycott was launched in Alabama with Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. And with those fundamental pieces of advice encapsulated, I must cast a wider net. Commonplace guidance won't cut it with the Global Professional Association for Corporate Chief Communication Officers, and neither should it. Because here's the crux of my message to you. Breaking down solitudes involves reaching out and taking the side of those behind the walls of isolation. It's a process that starts by refusing indifference, dropping the masks, and making choices. And this must be said, in times of significant polarization, the concept of neutrality often becomes fraught. While the allure of neutrality might suggest a form of impartiality or even wisdom, in certain circumstances, it can be tantamount to complicity. Historical examples such as pogroms, racially motivated massacres, and the Nazi regime's persecution of Jews, gays, blacks, gypsies, and the handicapped illustrate that neutrality can serve to enable and perpetuate violence and injustice. As Desmond Tutu said, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. Or as esteemed historian Howard Zinn put it succinctly in the title of his autobiography, you can't be neutral on a moving train. In key moments of history, much more is at stake than a difference of opinion. Sometimes there is peril, mortal peril. And here's a short case study, one that every Haitian, man and woman, knows about. Haiti and the Dominican Republic share, as you know, the same island that was named Hispaniola, or Little Spain, by Christopher Columbus, the Italian explorer who set off on a commissioned mission of conquest on behalf of the colonial empire of Spain under the reign of Isabella the Catholic. As he let foot on the island, he ordered his sailors to plant a huge cross on the ground as an act of territorial possession, in full view of the astonished natives who welcomed them peacefully. The island lost its original name, Haiti Boyo Quisqueya, in the language of the Taino, Arawak, and Caribe peoples. These indigenous people were soon enslaved by Spain and France, who shared the territory between them. On the advice of the Spanish Dominican evangelist Las Casas, who took up the cause of the indigenous peoples now decimated and threatened with extinction, plantation owners of the African continent, and the empires they served turned to the African continent, where they captured millions of men, women, and children to be exploited like expendable beasts of burden. This trade in enslavement, enslaved human beings continued for 4 centuries. When in 1791, 500,000 of those slaves in the French colony of Saint-Domingue, the richest of them all, rose up, ransacked the plantations, drove off the owners, and victoriously routed the troops sent by Napoleon Bonaparte, it was seen as the ultimate affront by the colonial empire. Still, the Republic of Haiti was founded on January 1st, 1804. The first state ever created by slaves, slaves who conquered their own freedom and made it the first state to abolish slavery in human history. Spain braced itself and tightened its grip on the other part of the island. Anti-Haitian campaigns at the border were many and bloody. One such massacre that all Haitians remember took place on October 2nd, 1937, exactly 86 years ago today. Under the orders of dictator Rafael Leonidas Trujillo of the Dominican Republic. Weeks before, the Dominican president publicly had accepted a gift of Hitler's Mein Kampf, whose racial theories he clearly embraced. A visiting Nazi delegation was welcomed by glowing newspaper editorials. Long live our illustrious leaders, the Honorable President Dr. Trujillo and the Führer of German Reich, Adolf Hitler. Hitler's idea gave Trujillo a racist and nationalist plan to distract Dominicans from their empty stomachs. Reminding Dominicans that they could not afford to feed foreigners, too, Trujillo cracked down on migration from Haiti. But powerful American sugarcane plantation owners who brought in Haitians to cut cane because, unlike Dominicans, they worked for practically nothing, forced him to make huge exceptions. He resorted to deporting Haitians and tightening border patrols, but the Haitians kept coming. On October 2nd, 1937, while Trujillo was drunk at a party in his honor, not far from the Massacre River, he gave orders for the solution to the Haitian problem. In the book of Judges, 40,000 Ephraimites were killed at the River Jordan because their inability to pronounce Shibboleth identified them as foreigners. On the Dominican border, Trujillo's men asked anyone with dark skin to identify the sprigs of parsley they held up. Persil, they would say. Haitians whose Creole uses a wide, flat R could not pronounce the shrilled R, not the guttural H in the Spanish word for parsley, perejil. For almost a week, from October 2nd to 8th, 1937, thousands of Haitians were slaughtered with guns, machetes, clubs, and knives by Dominican troops, Dominican civilians, and members of the local Dominican political authorities. To increase the death toll, the main bridge between the Dominican Republic and Haiti was closed. Many died while trying to flee to Haiti across the Habon River that divides the two countries on the island. The troops followed them into the river to cut them down, causing the river to run with blood and corpses for several days. The Parsley Massacre, as it came to be known, was not an overnight phenomenon. It was months, years in the making. It all started with words of intolerance, scapegoating, a crescendo of hate speech, and then mass violence. Communications, as you know, can serve truth or lies, good or evil. Likewise, one can be on the right side of history or on the wrong side of history. And not to be too simplistic or Manichaean, it must be noted that these are not static but evolving concepts along with societal norms and understandings. Nonetheless, being on the right side of history implies caring an ethical stance that aligns with humanity's highest values, a capacity for doing the right thing that is ultimately vindicated over time. Indifference is not an option, said my parents. There is a moral imperative to engage critically with the pressing issues of one's time. Being well informed and actively participating in societal debates are prerequisites for making ethical choices. Ignorance or indifference to the complexities of issues like systemic racism, economic inequality, and human rights abuses can perpetuate harm. For help, maybe we can turn to other times in history that were highly polarized. There was a time when slavery and abolition were hugely polarizing issues. There was a time when women's right to vote was a highly polarizing issue. There was a time when racial segregation and the fight against lynchings were very polarizing issues. What we find in that polarized times can also be periods of great and necessary social, political advances. And today, the list of polarizing issues includes human rights for those fleeing their home countries in quest of freedom, health, and well-being, for those with different sexual and gender identities, the right to know and understand our shared history in light of the systems of imperial conquest and slavery that ruled for centuries with their huge human toll to this day. So what if there was indeed a moral arc to history? One that blends toward justice, equality, and the welfare for all. Wouldn't we have to choose which side of the arc to stand on? We are not merely bystanders in the unfolding of events, but active participants in it, shaping the world toward a more equitable and humane future, or not. So there lies the choice. So what should we do? Well, I come to you with unshakable belief, the unshakable belief that there is an antidote to intolerance, scapegoating, hate speech, and violence. There is. You see, through Maya Angelou's words, you have seen and certainly felt the unique potency and power of art to liberate truth from the dark dungeons of silence and indifference. As we traveled across Canada during my years as Governor General, my husband, Jean-Daniel Lafont, philosopher, filmmaker, and writer, was struck, as I was, to see the most marginalized young people, often treated as outcasts, making powerful use of the arts, of poetry, using the power of words, spoken words, of Bronx-born hip-hop, of visual and performance arts. So we approached young people from Aboriginal communities, Black communities, racialized youth, white youth living in precarity, LGBTQ2+ youth, and we listened. We came to support their efforts to come together, to launch civic initiatives using the arts, to open up spaces for reflection and action, to facilitate dialogue, to facilitate difficult conversations to happen, and to revitalize also their communities. We saw them doing that. And we saw the impact. We saw these young change agents hard at work, creativity being used as a weapon of mass construction. We saw the power of the arts saving lives, creating spaces of emancipation. We saw novel practices take on, deconstruct and dismantle hate speech and racist propaganda, powerful means of heartfelt communication, diffuse violence and exclusion. Courage at work. So the Michaëlle Jean Foundation was born at their request. Their advice was foundational to our programs. And let me mention three. 3 programs. One is the National Black Canadian Summit, le Sommet Pan-Canadien des Communautés Noires, the first platform in Canadian history to bring together all the country's Afro-descendant communities. The scale is simply massive. It is being built in close alliance with Aboriginal communities. It is very successful in mobilizing influencers and decision makers, such as many of you here, from both the public and private spheres, financial institutions, universities and research teams, and so on. And our focus is a national action plan to eradicate systemic racism. Launched just last year, the Halifax Declaration, I encourage you to look it up online, is a compelling manifesto for freedom with a global impact. We have seized upon the UN's International Decade for People of African Descent on 3 pillars: recognition, justice, and development, 2015 to 2024. In a strategic, coordinated, and orderly fashion, Canada's Black communities have demonstrated in exemplary fashion how the strongest impetus for change towards a more just, equitable, and inclusive society is most viable when it comes from the grassroots and the living shoots of young people on the ground. Another of our flagship programs is the 4th wall, making the invisible visible. Le 4e mur, rendre l'invisible visible, through which we are opening up inclusive spaces for dialogue for young people everywhere, partnering with cultural institutions to foster social cohesion through solid intercultural and intergenerational relationships. It's amazing, it's intense, it's beautiful, full of optimism. Our 3rd and most recent project, Power of the Youth, Le Pouvoir des Jeunes, highlights the initiatives and civic solutions put forward by young people from Black communities, helping to perpetuate and consolidate the impact of the leadership, grow and strengthen their networks on a national scale. Beautiful, powerful. We're also working on setting up a program dedicated to creative and social entrepreneurship by young people in the capital, Ottawa, a model we hope to replicate elsewhere to affirm their contribution to economic development. So art provides the means to stand up and speak out, with the ability to communicate everything, even unspeakable pain, through aesthetics and emotion. Inclusion is an active verb, not merely a passive wish. It invites participation and engages in relationship. The most effective means of putting the motto, breaking down solitudes in action, is baked right into the work of the Michaëlle Jean Foundation. So I'm inviting you in for practical advice on how to break down solitudes. I hope you remember 3 things. Seek and listen. Easier said than done, I know, but do. Elevate in search of common ground, especially through the highest values. Approach and invite to build relationships. And such is my call to action, my invitation to you. And I ask you also to join us in this journey. Investment in precious human capital will always be the most profitable endeavor over the long term. Beyond divisions, conflict, and polarization lies a rainbow of breathtaking hues. In transcending barriers, we rediscover our humanity in its most beautiful features, our capacity for empathy. Empathy is about knowing that the other is in you and you are also in the other. Respect, curiosity, reverence for life, and collaborative creativity. Refusing indifference, without masks, we break down the walls and build bridges to the other side of the arc. And I can see no higher goal than this for human communication going forward. Don't you think so? So, yes, together we are stronger. Together we set an example. We create value. We create hope. you matter and you belong. And for this, I thank you very much. Je vous remercie. In which, for our Brazilian friends, obrigada. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.